Hello, and welcome to this Masumi webinar. My name is Katie, and I will be your Global Spec moderator. Now let me introduce today's presenter. With us today, we have Jeffrey Green. Jeffrey is the Industry Segment Manager of the Medical Industry at Masumi. To read more about Jeffrey today, please look at the speaker bio window right next to the main presentation window. And with that, I'll pass things along to Jeffrey to get this webinar started. Go right ahead.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining the webinar today. My name is Jeffrey Green. I'm the Medical Industry Segment Manager for Masumi. I'm going to jump into our presentation today and talk about how we look at medical. And I'll start with a little summary of what we're going to cover today. So right off the bat, our agenda, we're going to do an overview of medical, what is medical and how we look at it at Masumi. We're going to look at common types of equipment, the overall market size. And then we're going to look at what engineers deal with and who we normally work directly with. And we're going to talk about prototype to production and what the designer's dilemma is and how Masumi can help actually solve that dilemma. So we're going to jump into Masumi's configurable model, Masumi's manufacturing process, some solution examples, and what is really driving the growth in medical and what we see in the industry. And then we're also going to just look at other types of solutions that through doing research I've found that seem pretty interesting to me. Just do an overview of those. All right, so how do we look at medical? And this is, kind of broad strokes here, but starting at the top, medical is a big industry. And breaking it down into some smaller segments, we look at life science instrumentation being one of the biggest and most important. Then, larger equipment like capital equipment. This is stuff like dialysis machines, big, large machines that are going to be doing consumables, and maybe even radiotherapy machines. As we move further down, we have robotic surgery, which is really, really interesting, kind of more the cutting edge of what we're doing and what we're seeing in surgery these days. You've got different machines for different types of procedures. And then you've got pharma, of course, and that's, really the manufacturing of drugs and a lot of times dispensing and filling of those drugs. And then next, patient care, which is, things needed for to take care of patients. So you have wheelchairs, stretchers, beds, things of that nature. And then lastly, we look at just contract design and contract manufacturing. And really those companies tend to be building either life science instrumentation, different platforms, or, sometimes working on the larger capital equipment. Something I didn't really touch on there with life science instrumentation, it's all over the board from spectroscopy, chromatography. PCR is huge, and as with COVID-19 and everything these days, that's become kind of a household name, PCR, because everyone knows that that's the technology that gives the most accurate test results. That's been a really, really big segment to grow. You've got immunoassay, liquid handling, clinical analyzers, microscopy, flow cytometry. Next generation sequencing is really, really interesting, also very cutting edge. We're looking at genomic and gene research. And then we have centrifuges and scanning and imaging is how we're kind of looking at the broad medical world and where we sell our parts to, or where we work with engineers. So moving on, just jumping a little bit more into the different types. Again, life science instruments is one of the biggest segments for medical and for us as well. We see, these are typically, OEM companies making oven-sized instruments or about that size, and typically with some sort of linear motion in them, so 1 to 3 axes of linear motion. Next, you've got the capital equipment. There's a big picture of what that looks like. It's a large machine doing many different operations. They're typically pretty expensive, upwards of millions of dollars, and a lot of times in-house for some of these larger companies. Might be producing needles, catheters, diagnostics tests. I know, again, with COVID, the diagnostics test world has been really growing, and the need for that has been very big. Then moving down, we've got contract design and manufacturing. Again, these are companies that are contracted by other companies to help develop, normally life science instruments or capital equipment. And then lastly, the four segments that we're looking at, surgical robotics, so cutting edge surgery equipment. This really just allows for smaller incisions and improved patient outcomes. So this is a trend that we're seeing more and more of, is using robots to get into smaller places inside of the body. So looking at the market size, the overall global medical market in 2019 was $457 billion with a CAGR of 4.4%. And looking below that, if you remember the last slide, global life science instrumentation market is estimated at $60 billion with a CAGR of 5.9%. So a little bit faster compound annual growth rate. And then what's feeding kind of into life science and really working together in that segment is the point of care diagnostics as well as lab automation. A lot of the instruments get used in either of those markets, and you're looking at a 26.3 billion with point of care and a very fast growth rate of 10.2%, and then lab automation also growing quickly as well with a 6.6%, but a little bit smaller at 4.3 billion. So we see, good growth, and we've seen that as well with our work with engineers developing this equipment. The next slide. So want to jump into prototype to production and what a normal process is for typical companies. Going to start looking at where this starts. So when a company starts working on an instrument, they start with ideation and research. This is typically top chemists and biologists in medical producing new technologies in the lab and working with marketing to find the right fit and making sure to be significantly differentiated in the market. Sometimes it even starts with, an MRD or a PRD from the marketing team to then inform and get the path started for scientists. But as we move further down, we're looking at the step from research to design. This step is really when engineering gets involved. And for us, this is also when Misumi tends to get involved, because it's going from a proof of concept, in the lab, to how do we make an electromechanical instrument to utilize the technology. So again, this is where Misumi will get involved typically with engineers to start supporting the project. Moving further down from design to prototype, in my mind, this is really where the fun starts. You get to start building things. So, often the bigger companies will keep this work in-house, in a vertically integrated fashion with cross-functional abilities to take the design from science to engineering. That being said, companies big and small also look to third-party contract design and manufacturing companies to support this effort as well. So this is where we see a lot of times these contract design and manufacturing companies getting involved, working with either startups or with bigger companies who just want to bring the design out of their house and work with somebody else. So prototyping is critical next step. This is where parts get purchased. And in our case, a lot of times product samples are supplied. When we work with engineers, a lot of times if we're brought in early on a project, we'll provide samples to test and to move further along in the design. This is key proof of concept work that informs the direction of the product. As we keep moving further down, development, this is a great time to learn more about what Misumi can do from a lead time and cost perspective. So, a good time to lean on Misumi and make sure lead times and costs are low and components meet RoHS and REACH requirements, which, in medical is really important. We see the need for that time and time again. So we can provide that type of documentation. Misumi also can provide lifetime calculations. So a lot of times when we start working in documenting the design, we can help provide lifetime calculations for things like linear guides or actuators. So other value we can add in this step is really, I like to look at the example of ball screws. From a C10 to a C7 quality level, the price and the lead time considerably drop. So sometimes, an engineer will have designed the C7, which is, higher accuracy. And when we start moving towards production, we realize, the lead times are a little bit longer, the cost is a little bit higher. Do we really need that accuracy? So I always want to bring that up with engineers, look at other options, and oftentimes a C10 works better. or I guess works better from the perspective of lead times and costs. And as long as you can get away with that accuracy, it tends to be a better way to go. So that's one thing that we consult on is in our approach to working with engineers is just looking at the overall picture, not just what's required from an engineering perspective, but how can we make sure the design is lower cost and also is going to meet your needs from a lead time perspective when it goes into production. So the next, you move on from documenting the design and preparing for testing procedures. And the testing phase is also very important here. It really ensures that the design is ready for production. And this is another place that Misumi gets involved. We add value here by finding alternative parts as well if anything goes wrong in testing or if things aren't behaving like you expected. And really our goal here is just to achieve the best outcome through testing and help get through to production. So after that, you move on to training. It tends to be, the company will train the rest of their employees on how the device works, get ready to release it, and it gets released, gets out in the field to the masses for some time, and starts gathering more customer-centric feedback. From that feedback, sometimes there's maintenance that's required or upgrades are necessary, and we can help in that process as well, upgrading parts that need to be upgraded if needed. And then finally, retirement when the product's done. And a lot of times in medical, it's a long timeline. It can be, a 2 to 5 year development phase. And then, it's in the market for 10 to 15 years sometimes before being retired. And then we start over again. Okay, moving on. So this is just diving a little bit deeper into the cycle, the design cycle of the engineer. Just a little infographic I put together here. Really, again, it starts, and it's just sort of reiterating what we just discussed, but we start with a product requirements document. And here at step 1, as we start coming up with the design, we're supporting engineering with the initial scope, learning and understanding what that entails. Oftentimes we have in-person meetings to go over the design. Then as we come kind of more to the top, we start seeing additional components being designed in, maybe some additional meetings with engineers to see prototypes, assess additional technical or cost savings opportunities. And then as we start coming down the sine wave here on the cycle, we're getting closer to the design lock. So this ends up being a lot of the smaller components that you end up needing, like brackets or screws, things of that nature. And really we're supporting the engineer, again, here with technical data, budgetary pricing, short lead times, RoHS certs. And then as we come into the design lock, we're really just confirming the bill of materials, what's going to make it into the design, potentially getting ready to do more testing. So we're supporting engineering through that, and then addressing any problems that may come up and ensuring the success of testing. And then typically there may be some pre-production that happens then towards the end here where there could be some additional design that's needed as you get through testing and realize there's some small changes that need to take place. And this is also where we would start working with the buyer. So our focus sort of shifts from engineering to then working with the buyer, and we start talking about quantities forecasted for production and looking at what is our pricing needs for those higher quantities. So we can tend to look at pricing agreements if we need to stock components, those types of things. And that's normally, we tend to visit the customer, meet with buyers to do that. And then lastly, 6 here, we support engineering with last minute changes. So if there's anything as we're coming into pre-production, into production that needs to change, we want to make sure that we're able to support that. So what is Misumi's niche and what sets us apart? This is really what I think is so special about Misumi. It starts here with the designer's dilemma. As an engineer, you're trying to create a product right off the bat. You're trying to move quickly, and so maybe you are able to just design in a sort of a standard part, something like this, like a standard shaft, off-the-shelf bar stock. The downside is there's limited selection, and you might be compromising your design. The upside is there's 3D models, part numbers, low cost, convenient. It tends to be pretty quick. Then the other side, kind of the coin, so to speak, is the custom option. So when you go custom, you're you tend to work with a local machine shop, you're going to get exactly what you need, which is the upside, but you have to develop the CAD yourself. You create manufacturing drawings. Oftentimes there's long quote times, setup charges, can be expensive, and long delivery. A lot of times with the local machine shop, to do one or two for a prototype tends to be pretty expensive. So this is where Masumi comes in and how we try to solve this dilemma. We have an in-between that we call configurable. And really what this is a framework that has been predetermined by the most common features needed on components. And it allows the engineer to have high convenience, unlimited selection, nearly uncompromised design. You've got the 3D model. You also end up with a global part number, which is really cool. So if your design ends up going to Singapore or Mexico or somewhere else, you'll still be able to order the same part. And then lastly, you'll have low cost and reliable delivery as well. So this is really what sets Masumi apart. We're the only company to really do this type of configurable model. So diving a little bit deeper into the configurable model, what we see here is a bunch of base product families here. Basically, it's the features that are allowed to be configured within each product. So if we look at this, we're looking at a shaft that has a little bit of a step down and has a space for a retaining ring. As far as what's configurable here, everything that's shown in blue, every dimension, the P dimension, the diameter of the step down, the B dimension, the distance from the end to the retaining ring, and the F dimension, which is the distance from the end to the start of the step down. Then you've got your D dimension, which is really just a nominal, it's kind of standard bar stock dimension, diameter, which could be 10 millimeters or 25 millimeters, and somewhere something like that. And then L, which is your overall length of the main dimension. Additionally, the stuff that you'll need to configure that's selectable is the material type. So in this case, it's a 1045 carbon steel or a 304 stainless steel. And then you've got surface treatment. So you've got black oxide or electroless nickel plating in this case. So once you've made all those selections, you then have a part number. You're able to download the CAD. It will give you for each quantity you'd like, a standard price, and then the days to ship. For something like this, you could see as low as 4 days to ship, depending on your quantities. So what is Masumi's manufacturing process? How is Masumi able to do these configurable parts so quickly? Really, we start with already having all the raw material blanks in stock. We receive your order. We actually have machine codes already set up for each feature required. In some cases, we have dedicated machines for specific parts. We pull the correct blanks, place it in the machine, and do the initial cutting and machining. In some cases, this is actually fully automated. We do this with very little human interaction for the parts that we do a lot of, like locating pins and shafts. So then moving on, we do the heat treating, oil quench line for carburizing your out of the line. Then we move on to an additional machining step if needed, depending on the part. And then next we add surface treatment, which tends to happen same day for most parts. We have dedicated facilities to turn these parts around very quickly. And then in some cases, there's assembly required. In the case of a locating pin like this, there's no assembly. But in some cases, there's assembly required, so we would do that. And then we pack it and ship it. So this really, the summary here is this predetermined framework of features for each part number with subsequent machine codes, also coupled with the automation, allows this to happen very quickly and at very low cost. This is really what Masumi does so well and what sets us apart from our competitors. So now I just wanted to jump into types of machines and the types of products that we tend to see in these machines. So I mentioned earlier the PCR machine, and it's just a sort of a generic picture of what a PCR machine might look like. You've got a lot of components that you could see in it. You have linear shafts, stepping motors, linear guides. So, you may have this long axis here for linear shafts with linear bushings on it. For the Z-axis moving up and down, potentially moving the sample around, you could have a little bit more accuracy with a linear guide. What's really also very popular, we see a lot of, is the space-saving bolts, just the low cap head bolts. They hide nice. They're really high quality and also a good aesthetic on a machine as well. You've got timing belts and pulleys, which might be used in moving the main axes back and forth. Bevel gears potentially, metal washers and collars. Ball screws might be involved for the Z-axis, moving the linear guide. You might have couplers connected to your motor, to your actuator, or to your ball screw. And then, just additional components, mounting plates and brackets, which are configurable, ball bearings, ball screw supports for the ball screw, cylinders and pushers. There's quite a bit of components that might go into a machine like this, and really everything that's shown here, Misumi can provide. Moving on to the larger equipment, it's slightly different components that tend to be used in the larger equipment, but some similar crossover. So this is, again, large machines that might be used for consumables. You've got configurable L brackets, often cam followers, aluminum extrusion, the stack light systems that you see at the top. You can get those from us as well. Resin plates, sometimes locating pins for locating a plate or something that's being manufactured. Metal materials of all different types. Non-metal washers. This is oftentimes important in washdowns or in heat-sensitive areas. You've got plastic belt and plastic conveyors. These often move products along down the line. Pillow block bearings, doors to get in and out, and door handles. You've got timing belts and pulleys also tend to be in there, and then leveling mounts and rubber feet for leveling the equipment. And then lastly, rotary shafts and shaft supports. So Misumi is a global company. We are headquartered in Tokyo, Japan, and we have headquarters in the States in Schaumburg, Illinois, which is near Chicago. We have 62 sales offices around the globe. We have 22 manufacturing sites and 18 logistics centers. We have a large warehouse in Torrance, which is near Los Angeles, or in Los Angeles, I should say. We've got one in Dayton, Ohio, as well as manufacturing in Ohio, and then also a warehouse there as well. So we really are a global company, which allows us to support projects no matter where they end up going. So next, I was going to just dive a little bit deeper into medical and what's driving medical, and or at least what we see from our side of the business. So really, if you looked at that life science instrumentation slide from earlier, underneath that is sort of lab automation and point of care. So let's talk about the differences. Lab automation is kind of your standard lab. This is where a clinician would take a sample from a patient, packages up and safely transports it to a lab. The sample is shipped to the central lab and processed by a technician. The results can usually be generated in 1 to 2 days, and then a report tends to be sent out. It's got to go back to the clinician, and then the clinician ends up sending it through normally a portal, a health portal, and that can take up to a week. So not bad, but the amount of time to get results is a little bit longer. These labs in lab automation tend to be pretty big. There's a lot of, as the name would suggest, automation from each type of test, depending on what the workflows and what needs to be done. Sort of on the other side of that is point of care. So with point of care, you've got diagnostics test that's outside of a lab that produces a reliable result. This type of testing often happens on compact automated instruments with consumable cartridges. So think smaller instruments that take up less of a footprint. They might be able to sit on a tabletop. Most commonly, point of care testing is used in hospitals, clinics, doctors' offices, and sometimes they're trying to push towards drugstores and pharmacies as well. The providers in the emergency room run point of care tests also in sort of trying to help with COVID-19, triage, trying to move people into the right rooms to make sure that if people are seeing respiratory distress, that they're treated properly and sort of kept away from other people that might not be having the same symptoms. So next, I wanted to just start looking at some types of different types of machines. Some of these people may be customers of ours and some not. This is just research that I've done through learning more about the medical industry and making sure that we have products and solutions that fit. So this first one here is a large machine from Abbott. It's the Alinity M. And what they say here is the Alinity M allows you to consolidate 60% of routine PCR testing on one instrument. And it does this by having 20 onboard assays. So the way it's marketed here is they drive lab efficiencies through operational efficiencies, reducing the complexity and streamlining workflows. There can be staff efficiencies, improve resource flexibilities, and ease of training. And then that leads to cost efficiencies, drives maintenance and service and cost optimization. So this is going to be a large instrument, probably the size of a couple of refrigerators, and really a lab automation workload. In comparison, more of a point of care device. This is another one I had found doing research from a company called Truvian. It's a benchtop system, so think small, like the size of a computer or so. And what it does is it provides lab accurate results in as little as 20 minutes, so very quickly for a full suite of health tests using 5 drops of blood. So very little requirement and can do 20 minutes for a panel of tests. There's unprecedented integration of 3 crucial testing modalities, which will deliver comprehensive health panel results in one run. And it uses a novel reagent technology requiring no refrigeration. So that's kind of their marketing piece on it. Seems pretty interesting, looks promising. Don't know much more about it than that, but just kind of showing you the other side of diagnostics and the much smaller footprint. These probably aren't going to be doing the same types of tests as what you'd see with the PCR. Moving on to the next generation sequencing. So this stuff's really technical, probably a little bit over my head, so I won't dive too far deep into the technology itself. But what I did kind of gather from doing research is, gene sequencing enables a wide variety of applications, such as understanding and treating cancer. It's being used to gain insights into the treatment of COVID-19 and also accelerating antibody discovery for COVID-19, among other things. So 2 devices here, one here from 10x Genomics and another from Illumina, both in this sort of next generation sequencing space. Moving on to robotic surgery. This one is always, I think, really cool and a little bit easier for people to understand. On the left, you've got a picture from Auris Health. They are making an endoscopy robot. So the Monarch, here's what they call it. It's a platform that reinvents the concept of a bronchoscope, leveraging the power of robotics and a novel telescoping design to reach deeper into the lung. And they're able to do this much deeper than conventional methods. It's intended to provide bronchoscopic visualizations of and access to patient airways for diagnostics and therapeutic procedures. Moving on to Mako Smart Robotics. This is used for hip and knee replacements. And the marketing piece on it is really they talk about 3 key components. 3D CT based planning, which they take a full CT scan of either the knee or the hip that they're going to be working on. And they have this branded AccuStop haptic technology, which makes sure that you're cutting only what you need to be cutting and are more accurate with your cutting. It also gives you, better outcomes for the total knee and total hip because of these technologies. So they're able to do that CT scan. The doctor can see a little bit better what's going on, weight the joint correctly, and then make sure they cut what's needed to be cut. And give better results and better health for the patient. So that is the end of my presentation. Just wanted to say thank you to everyone for joining today. I really appreciate everyone's interest to learn more about Masumi and how we can potentially collaborate on projects in the future. Again, my name's Jeffrey Green. My email I've left here for everyone. Please reach out directly if you want to discuss how we can work together. I'd be happy to, gather more information about what your guys' needs are, what projects you have, and if it makes sense, connect you with your local sales manager. So thanks again for joining. Really appreciate everyone's time, and hope to be working with you in the future. Thanks.
All right, Jeffrey, thank you so much for that great presentation. We do have some questions that have come in from our attendees, so we are going to move into answering those right now. So our first question for today, Jeffrey, does Masumi sell to industries other than medical?
Yeah, so thank you for everyone for joining. And yeah, to answer your question, we absolutely do. We sell really into all industries. Some of our top ones, though, are automotive with electric vehicles and batteries. Also, warehouse automation has been big lately, packaging equipment, semicon. We're really kind of all over the place. I'm just focused into medical, and that's what this is on. So, but yeah, we cover everything.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for that answer. Another attendee is asking, they're just asking if you have CAD downloads and if they are free.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have free CAD downloads on our website of really every product that we have, from the products that we manufacture as a manufacturer that Masumi is, also to the products that we distribute as a distributor. So if you get a third-party brand product from us, we also have free CAD for that as well. So it makes it super easy as a designer, as an engineer, to download what you need to put into the SolidWorks or whatever you're using for your 3D CAD, and keep your design moving.
Okay, thank you so much, Jeffrey, for that answer. Another attendee is asking, does Masumi have local representatives that can help with application questions?
Yeah, we do. So we have a team of sales account managers that are throughout the United States. And so depending on what location you're in, we can absolutely connect you to your account manager. So yeah, we have a lot of people that are very knowledgeable about Masumi and about applications that are happy to consult and help out in the ways that I described in our presentation.
Okay, thank you so much. And we did have a couple of questions about this presentation being available or the presentation being shared after today. So I will be uploading a version of the PowerPoint as a PDF in the resource widget at the end of the webinar. And this webinar will be available for the next 90 days, so you can come back and watch it again. So Jeffrey, our next attendee question here, where can I go to learn more about Masumi? And can they help with my medical automation solutions?
Yeah, so good question, Katie. Thank you. The main easiest way is to just go to our website, Masumi.com, and we also have at the top of the website, there's an industry served ribbon kind of right at the top, and that can look at medical specifically. So if you go down and look at medical and lab automation, click on that, and that will kind of give you more information about medical. And you can also put your information in if you want to, schedule a meeting with myself. That's also possible from that spot on the website as well.
Okay, Jeffrey, thank you for that answer. Another question here, do you offer pre-constructed BOMs?
So we don't, I think I understand the question is like, can we help configure or put together a bill of materials and assemble it? We're not really doing a whole lot of that ourselves in-house, but because we work with so many contract design and manufacturing companies, depending on where you're located and what's needed, we could probably introduce you pretty quickly to some of our customers that do that buy a lot of and work with us a lot. So We're not doing it in-house really yet. It may change eventually, but we can happily introduce you to our network that could do it for you.
Okay, thank you so much for that answer. Another attendee here is asking, all right, we are piercing devices, which is piercing around 120/64N, but the reverse force of lead spool tends to bend the entire system, even though we have thrust bearing on top to take the load. So do we have any solutions to take that force on top of the lead screw?
Interesting. A good question. I'd probably need to see maybe models to understand how it's set up better to answer the question, but would be happy to take it offline and look at your design a little closer and see what we could come up with for sure. I'm not sure who answered that question, but or who asked that question, but if you want to shoot me an email, I'd be happy to meet with you after.
All right, Jeffrey, thank you so much. All right, and we do have another question. The person who asked about the BOMs, they're just making another statement, maybe adding to what you've already answered, but pre-assembled BOMs and CAD assemblies.
Yeah, so we do have some of that. I think I understand that question. So we have some, on our website, we have a whole library of CAD, not just for each product, but we actually have assemblies. So you can go on and go through the library and actually see, some assemblies that have already been done. So you might be able to look for, if you're just starting a design and you're trying to come up with ideas, if you go through our on the website, you can just peruse through this library and pull out these assemblies. So yeah, the assemblies themselves are in CAD, and pretty much everything that's shown in the assembly in, I think it's yellow, is a Masumi component that you can buy. And some of that stuff, I know I've worked with engineers who have actually taken those assemblies and used pieces of them because it was kind of what they were looking for. So that's possible on the website. We have, I don't know, there's probably a few hundred different assemblies that are shown for different applications that you're welcome to download and play around with.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So just a reminder for our attendees, if you have a question, enter it into the Q&A box and click submit. We will do our best to get through as many as we can. And I just wanted to point out a couple of the widgets that we have along the bottom of our webinar console. So we have our resource list. We have a few items in there. I will be adding the presentation towards the end of the webinar. We also have a book a meeting widget. So if you want to click on that and book a meeting with Jeffrey, you can do that. There's also a URL widget down there, which will bring you somewhere very amazing. And you can click on that. It'll pull you right to the URL. And then we have a couple other widgets along the bottom, a survey widget as well. If you'd like to take a moment to fill that out at the end of the webinar, we would appreciate it. So Jeffrey, back to our questions. This person is asking, we have a configurable part made with Masumi already. Should we talk to a local rep for the volume pricing?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. So our website will show the tiered volumes that we sell that part at. And so if it's like way above what we show as standard on the website, then I would definitely contact your local rep and talk to them. Like if you, let's say the highest tier, stops at 100 and you need 1,000, there may be additional volume that we can look at, bringing that price a little bit lower. So yeah, I would definitely suggest contacting your local account manager, going over your application, looking at your, forecast. Masumi is a just-in-time manufacturer, which basically means that we try to be super efficient and get you your parts, very quickly. So we do, we look at breaking higher quantities into smaller pieces and providing them in the right amount of time. So if you had a, multi-thousand piece order that you need over the year, we could break it down into, 100 at a time, or, 100 a month or something like that, or, 250 a month or whatever. So, understanding your needs and also your cost needs and quantity needs are key to our sales team's role. So definitely reach out. You can also reach out to me if you want to talk through some of that stuff, or if you want me to introduce you to your account manager directly, I'm happy to do that.
Okay, Jeffrey, thank you so much. We've got time for a couple more questions here. This next one is asking, what medical segment is the biggest for Masumi?
Yeah, good question. So the biggest, I would say, is probably the diagnostics, the life science instrumentation. That's really where we see probably the highest volumes, because you've got a lot of machines that are, that are being made in the hundreds or maybe low thousands. So that seems to be what's growing the fastest for us, but kind of a close call between that and then the larger capital equipment with consumables, because those machines are really big, and there's a fair amount of people doing those. So, but if I had to pick, I would say the life science instrumentation that's being kind of driven by the point of care and lab automation.
All right, thank you so much. All right, another attendee here. They're asking, can I learn more about configuring parts on the Masumi site?
Yeah, another good question. Absolutely, you can either just go to the website and play around with different parts that you might need. Alternatively, you can reach out to me, and we could do a video chat, and I can walk you through how it works, or I can introduce you to your local rep if that's preferred. So yeah, absolutely, we can help out there if needed. Just shoot me an email.
Okay, Jeffrey, thank you for that. And it looks like this is going to be the last question today. So if any attendees have any questions they'd like to add in before we end the webinar, please feel free to use your Q&A window and click submit, and Jeffrey will get back to you following the webinar. So our last one for today, where do you see the automation in the medical industry growing the fastest?
What I'm seeing a lot of lately is that next generation sequencing. That seems to be really the cutting edge of where the science is headed. And so there's more startups popping up with that. And yeah, I think it's just really the cutting edge of diagnostics and gene research and so on. So we keep seeing more and more of that, and it seems to be, from the research I've done, growing at one of the fastest rates within that life science instrumentation segment.
Okay, thank you, Jeffrey. And we just did get another question popped in here, so I feel like we've got time, so let's take it if that's all right. This person is asking, if we have parts made in our U.S. office but want to transfer production overseas in one of the covered territories of Masumi, how would that manufacturing be transferred overseas and shipped to our CM overseas?
Yeah, it's a good question. We see that a lot in medical specifically. Most commonly with medical, it's either going to Mexico or to Singapore, as I mentioned in my presentation. So really, the part numbers are global. So if you have Masumi part numbers, they can be ordered from any one of our subsidiaries. Masumi USA is technically a subsidiary of Masumi Group, which is the Japanese Japanese mother company. So if you're going to Singapore, we have a Masumi Singapore. You would just reach out to the representatives there with the part numbers that you need, and they will work directly with the team there, or in Mexico or wherever it's going. So yeah, it's absolutely possible. You just take the bill of materials, the Masumi parts with those part numbers. They're global part numbers. The pricing may be slightly different because we are subsidiaries. We do get different pricing in the different locations. So I'm not 100% sure that our pricing will be the same between the U.S. and wherever it's going. But if there's issues there we can work on pricing and try to make sure that it's the same or that it's comparable.
All right, thank you so much for that last answer. So we are going to wrap the webinar up right now. If anybody does have questions for Jeffrey after today's webinar, you can come back and enter in your questions later. So feel free to do that if you do have any last-minute questions that you think of. Jeffrey, I want to say thank you so much for a great presentation and for taking time to answer all of our attendees' questions. We enjoyed having you.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Katie, for having me, and thanks to everyone for joining. And again, please reach out if you have any any questions at all, I'm happy to help, and that's really what we're here for. So please save my email address and shoot me an email.
Okay, Jeffrey, thank you so much. So thank you to all of our audience members for being part of this webinar event. Take care, and we will speak with you soon.